Hi all. So I've been asked to do an introductory video on the basics of Bitcoin, and I think I'm going to title this video "What is Bitcoin?" And it's the dreaded question because it's such a difficult thing to explain, and I think I can jump right into it and say that it's two things at the same time. It's a currency and it's a payment network, and those two things aren't usually combined together. Um, for example, you have dollars and pounds and euros and whatever. They're all currencies, but they're not payment networks. And then you have payment networks like Visa and MasterCard and PayPal and Swift and all that stuff. They're not currencies. They are payment networks. Bitcoin has to do both of them at the same time. So usually people are talking about Bitcoin the currency. They're not talking about Bitcoin the network that it runs on. But understanding what Bitcoin is more about understanding. It's quite easy to understand as a currency. It's basically gold coins for a digital age. That's pretty easy to understand. But how the network can promise to afford those qualities to you, that's the hard part to understand. So I'm going to focus on Bitcoin the network rather than Bitcoin the currency. Um, so the problem Bitcoin has managed to solve, which is a problem that is created for anyone that's trying to create a currency on the internet, is how do I get rid of the central element that keeps track of where everything is at any one time, that keeps the whole system honest. In banking, or in any money that isn't cash, that verification is always done by a bank or some sort of authority figure, and that creates a system of centralization and control, and it works and it doesn't work, but it's a system we all know. If I send money to you by e-transfer or a bank or anything like that, or through any banking network, rather through PayPal, whatever, they are the ones that are tasked with knowing whether I really had the money to spend. And when you go on to spend the money I just sent you, again, it falls to them to figure out whether the payment is authentic, whether it comes from a person that actually had the money in the first place. But the whole system is based on some sort of authority and the trust we place in those institutions to be honest. And it's just how we're used to doing things. You have $10,000 in your bank account. The reason you have $10,000 in your bank account is because your bank says you do, not because of any other reason possible. And if they decide that you don't one day, then you don't. And you're not in charge of that ledger that they keep internally in their bank. And if an authority figure comes to your bank and says that money is in there due to illegal, it's been acquired illegally, it was stolen, or the person broke the law to get that money, or they didn't pay their taxes, then you'll also find out that while you do have the money and while the bank says you have the money is not under your control in any way. It will be frozen and taken from you, or you will just be prevented from spending it. So, I mean, that's a little bit of a tangent, but Bitcoin allows you to control your own money, as the network has no control over you. But more to the point, where money is at any one time within the Bitcoin network is known in a way that can be checked and independently verified by every single user at the same time. And it has to be for the purpose of, if you receive Bitcoin, there is no one you can check. There is no central authority that will tell you that you have received Bitcoin. You have to do it yourself, in essence. In reality, you don't need to exactly, but the fact that you can creates a system that you can trust without having to trust any central party. What the whole element of banking and record keeping and the maintenance of a ledger, which is what banks do in the Bitcoin space, is done with Bitcoin's blockchain. And Bitcoin's blockchain is an incredible thing to behold and to understand. And appending data to this ledger requires an enormous amount of work to be done collectively by all of the miners on the network. And when any one of those miners is successful and manages to append data to Bitcoin's blockchain in a way that the network finds acceptable, then the entire network begins working on a new part of data. And each lump of these bits of data is called a block, and they are all intrinsically linked to one another in a way where if you want to change any of the data in previous blocks, you have to outdo all of the work done cumulatively up until that point, and then outpace the current pace of the network. I mean, I'll go over all this again in a way that is less confusing. It's a really hard topic to explain well from the off, and there's a million videos out there that have done what I'm trying to do here with beautiful graphics and some planning without just stream of consciousnessing the whole thing. But that's my brand, and that's how I like to do things. Just sit here and talk and hopefully impart some information. So when you're making a Bitcoin transaction, you're signing a message that says, I want to move coins that are sitting here on the Bitcoin network to somewhere else. And when you do that, you have to have, it's a digital signature. So that's either perfect or completely wrong. It's not like a signature that you do with your hand. In order to sign a Bitcoin transaction that moves coins from A to B, it's not that you have to have the coins at point A. It's that point is a Bitcoin address, and a Bitcoin address is a cryptographic hash. Well, it's a few degrees removed from that, but it's essentially a cryptographic hash of a private number. And if you know that private number, you can move the coins from the Bitcoin address. The Bitcoin address is public information, and it can't be unhashed back into the private number. So, but if you make a transaction from a Bitcoin address and you knew the private number and you used that to sign it, everyone can verify that easily. And being able to verify it is not the same as being able to figure out what the private number was. And that's just due to the maths of how cryptography works. And maybe I'll get more into that, or maybe I won't. But in essence, what I do is teach people the very basics of cryptography, which in Bitcoin equates to you need to generate a secure, private, random number, which in practice you won't do yourself unless you really feel like learning how to generate 256-digit binary numbers using coin flips and then process them into hexadecimal and all that stuff, which is good and fun, but I don't imagine you're watching this video if you're on that level. In reality, you get a hardware wallet, which will generate that private number for you, and it will give you a backup, which is 24 words, which are the same as the number, but just in a different format. That number gets hashed into Bitcoin addresses. Some people are cringing at me saying that because it's not quite right, but for a high-level understanding, that's all you need to know. These Bitcoin addresses are like email addresses if email addresses were derived from your email password. You type in a random number, that's your password, it gets hashed into an address. Now, that address is sitting there, it can be public information, anyone can email you, but no one can read those emails or send emails from that account if they don't know that original number. In reality, email doesn't work like that. Your password is not mathematically linked to your email account. But if it were to be, then it would work the same way Bitcoin private keys and Bitcoin addresses do. So, bit of a tangent there. That's how Bitcoin works from a user's perspective. But back to moving coins around. When you sign that transaction and you broadcast it to the network, you say to the network, I want to move coins from this point to this point. You're not saying, I am the owner of these coins. Here's my identity. I am him. I am the guy that owns those coins. And the network goes, oh, okay, yeah, we see that you're really the owner of those coins. We accept your authority to move them after we've checked with these government bodies or if it fits within the legal framework we're required to adhere to. That's not how it works. It doesn't care about identity. The Bitcoin network has no notion of that as a concept. It will just say, was this signed correctly or not? So what that means is that if you lose your private keys and someone else finds them, they can make a Bitcoin transaction too. And the network doesn't go, wait a minute, you're not the real owner of those coins, because there are no real owners of coins. There are only correctly signed transactions or invalid transactions which are not signed properly. So if you know those 24 words and you're able to sign a transaction that is relevant to a Bitcoin address on the Bitcoin network that has coins at it, you can move coins from there to anywhere else on the network, or to any other valid Bitcoin address rather. And that's it. That's how you move Bitcoin. It's all about knowing a private key. And if you lose your private key, again, it's not like a bank. You can't go to your bank and say, I lost my debit card. Can you give me another one? Again, here I am. Here's my identity. I'm proving myself to you. And they go, no problem. Again, it doesn't work like that. There's no one you can do that to, which creates an enormous responsibility, because you are your own bank now. You are the final arbiter. You are the person that is responsible for all of your money, which means no one can help you out if you lose or get your keys stolen. They're just gone. So that's the double-edged sword of Bitcoin, is that you have complete freedom to do with your money whatever you want, but you are required to keep it secure yourself. And if you ever make a mistake, your coins are completely gone and there's no one you can turn to help you out. And I can explain that to you. There's more of a benefit than it might sound, but it is the price of the freedom that Bitcoin offers you. Is you have to be incredibly disciplined and careful and diligent. So back to a bit more of an overview about how the network itself works. So when people are making these transactions, when people are moving coins from point A to point B, there is, without a centralized ledger that was existing in all previous incarnations of digital money before Bitcoin and currently exists in all forms of finance. If you're buying a stock and a share, there's a broker that says this person owns that stock. If you have money in a bank, again, your bank is the one that says, yes, this person has that money. There's always some sort of central entity. And with Bitcoin, what has to happen is when you send coins from point A to point B, the person you're sending them to, how do they verify that you really had those coins? And they can check the digital signature to know that the transaction was legitimate, but that's only part of the story, because you can make the same transaction to someone else at the same time. You can move coins from point A to point B with a valid signature, and then you can move coins from point A to point C at the same time. Make 2 payments to 2 different people, leave with the product you just bought. One, you could be buying a thing in Australia and another thing in France at exactly the same time. Which transaction goes around the network first? Which one gets seen first? What happens if there's a disagreement in the entire network? How do you deal with that problem? That's the double spend problem, and that was the unsolved problem. And as far as I can tell, people disagree about when the internet really started. I consider it to be 1977. The concept of having native money on the internet has been around since then, and no one was able to solve the problem of, when you're using digital money that's purely digital, how do you stop someone spending the same money twice without having a centralized entity say, no, that's already been spent? How do you do it? Well, that is the hard part of Bitcoin. Because, okay, here's the situation again. I'm sending coins from point A to point B, and I'm also sending coins from point A to point C. And there has to be some sort of information that everyone can check and everyone can agree on that says, no, you already sent coins from A to B. So the A to C one isn't valid. And then the person sitting at point C can say, no, I didn't get those Bitcoins. You need to pay again, or I'm not giving you the product or service that you just pretended to pay for. There has to be a way for that. And that way can't be logging into your banking app and saying, oh, I've got the money, it's cool. Because the whole point of Bitcoin is to get away from that system of authority and control and dependence and corruption, to be quite honest, to be quite blunt, rather. So how does Bitcoin solve it? How does Bitcoin solve the double spend problem? There was an abstract for this problem called the Byzantine generals problem, or the two generals problem, which is there are two armies on either side of a village or a city, and they must invade the city. And General A is here and General B is here. Let's call them General X and Y because I've already been using A and B a lot. So you've got General X and you've got General Y. If either of them invade the city alone, they will lose. If they invade together, they will win. So General X sends a message over to General Y running through the city saying, we invade at midday tomorrow. And he knows that if General Y doesn't get the message, that he'll be invading alone and he will lose. So he asks for a response. Let me know you got this message, okay? So General Y says, okay, I got the message, but if he doesn't get my response saying I got the message, then I'm going to invade alone and then I will lose. So I'm going to need a response from him telling him that he got my response. That goes on forever. There is never a state where both of them know the same thing at the same time, because the same information cannot exist in two places in the universe at once. It's basically just the nature of our universe and space and time itself, that things are separated by time and space, and they can't occupy the same time and space at the same time. That is essentially the problem that Bitcoin has to solve, and it sounds like an unsolvable problem, and in theory it is an unsolvable problem, but in practice Bitcoin actually did manage to solve it. And how it does that is with its blockchain, which I can now start to elaborate on. What happens with that is when I send a valid transaction from point A to point B, this goes out into the network, it propagates. Then what happens is it forms part of something called a Merkle tree, where it is combined with other transactions sitting around on the network waiting to be picked up. No one trusts these transactions until the following process is completed. These transactions are combined with one another in a way that's reminiscent of a tree, hence a Merkle tree. Your transaction is like a leaf, then someone else's transaction is like a leaf. The two come together into a branch, then two more branches from other transactions come together into a larger branch, larger, until eventually you have the trunk of the tree, which is called the Merkle root. All of these transactions are combined together, and all of the nodes on the network are waiting for a miner to figure out a bit of random data that can be mixed in with all of those transactions together and spit out a number that meets a certain requirement. That's it. That requirement is made more or less difficult depending on how many miners are mining on the network at the time. And as a result, for mining and successfully figuring out that random number that you have to throw in with those transactions to generate a block, you create new Bitcoins for yourself. So there are a lot of people trying to do this. And Bitcoin has been designed deliberately to have a predictable inflation rate. It is a deflationary currency, but it is still, the coins are still being created at an ever decreasing rate. Miners mine new coins every 10 minutes. That's when all of the transactions floating around on the network, or a large amount of them, or a certain amount of them, will be picked up and put inside a block. And that's how long it takes roughly for all of the miners on the network to figure out that number. And because Bitcoin is designed to be deflationary and to have a predictable inflation rate, if more miners start mining and blocks start getting found too quickly, more often than every 10 minutes, the network adjusts and makes that number slightly more difficult to find. And it does that in exact proportion to how many more people are mining. So what that means is that Bitcoin has a predictable creation rate and a very if you were to, for example, if you were to send a transaction to someone and that transaction got put inside a block that was found by a miner, and you then wanted to scam that, let's say I'm sending Bitcoin from person A to person B. I signed it with a valid thing, so everyone knows I really did own those coins, but it didn't get outside of, so here we go. I'm going to start that again. This is the crux of it, and I really hope I'm about to bring it home. I'm sending coins from person A to person B. Person B doesn't want to give me the product or service until they know that I can't send those same coins to someone else and have that transaction maybe get the thing that gets recorded in the network. So they wait for something that looks like Bitcoin mining to happen. And what Bitcoin mining does is it picks up the transaction and it sticks it inside a block. And to find that block, they had to do a whole bunch of work. And that is the security of Bitcoin's network. They have to do a bunch of work, and their work is something we can verify easily, because when they find that magic number that can be mixed in with all of these transactions, and it meets the requirements that match the difficulty that the Bitcoin network imposes on finding new blocks, they publish that block, and we can all say, just like with the signature, if you have a Bitcoin address and you know the private key for that Bitcoin address, you can spend it in a way that everyone can verify instantly, but they can't take the Bitcoin address and unhash it back to the private key because it's impossible to do. Here, it's working in kind of the opposite direction with mining. If you mine a new Bitcoin block, you did something very difficult to do, but when you publish what you've been able to do, everyone can verify it very easily. And they're not exactly analogous. They're both elements of cryptography, but they work in slightly different ways. You're asking the entire Bitcoin network, all of the miners on the Bitcoin network, you're asking them to use their power to figure out what this number is. And you're saying, there are that many of you, you're that powerful collectively, and we don't want you to be able to find the solution for 10 minutes. So they get to work. They find this magic number. Once they find it, they've found a valid Bitcoin block. They publish that to the entire network, and there's a bunch of transactions in there. And we can verify instantly without using anything like the hash rate of the network, which is the hard part doing all the work. We can look at it and go, yeah, it's valid. It works. It's like if you do a bunch of work and you present your work to someone, they can verify that you've done the work without having to do the same work themselves. It's basically just finding a random number in a set of numbers that increases or decreases depending on how many people are mining, and saying, hey, I found it, to the network. And the network says, yeah, that's the right number. We just tried it and it worked. The network doesn't have to try all the numbers you did. They only have to try the right one. So I don't know why that got so complicated, but that's about the simplest way I can reduce it down. So once the miners find a block and your transaction is in that block, this is the point. I've made a transaction from point A to point B, and person B is saying, I'm worried he's going to make a transaction from that same point, but to point C. But you can see that the transaction he made to you from point A to point B, you can see now, hold on a minute, that's inside a block. So if he makes a transaction from the same place, the block now says that those coins aren't there anymore. So, if he wants to make that transaction to a different place, he needs to replace all the work that was done to find that block, do new work find a new block, include a different transaction in that block, and then publish that to the network and have the network accept it. The network won't do that because the network will probably 99.99999% of the time, by the time you found by the time you've replaced the block the network had, which had your transaction from A to B, by the time you manage to find a different block and do all the work required to find a valid block, where you have a different transaction in it that moved the coins from A to C, which, let's say that's you moving coins back to yourself, because that's how you could scam someone. You want to send coins back to yourself after pretending to send those coins to a different person who accepted it and gave you a good or service, and now you want to scam them. So you've sent the coins from A to B. The transaction ended up inside a block. The block got published to the network. It was valid. Now the network is trying to find the next block after that. But you're busy trying to remine this one block, do all the work required, which requires you to meet the difficulty imposed by the network, which is a staggering requirement. Depending on how many people are mining, it wasn't a staggering requirement at the very beginning because only a few people mined with their laptops back then. But now it's different. The higher that requirement gets, the more security Bitcoin's network has, though that is not the only element of what makes Bitcoin secure. Anyway, you've got a different transaction out there now. It's floating around in the network. It's moving coins from point A to point C, and point C is you moving the same coins back to yourself, and you want to trick the network. So you're trying to find a different block. Because one part of data in the block changed, you now have to start again finding a completely different number. And you've got to try every number in the same almost infinitely large set of numbers. And you need to do it in 10 minutes because, well, in reality, the network will want 2 blocks, not 1, because the network has a block. It's happy with that block. If you suggest an alternative to that block, it will probably ignore it. If 2 blocks get found at exactly the same time, sometimes you can have one of the blocks will get orphaned, or there'll be a sort of I think it's called a race condition, where you have 2 blocks floating around the network at the same time, and whichever miner finds the block after that, whatever they chose to build on, whichever one they chose out of those 2 blocks becomes the longest chain, and the entire Bitcoin network is designed and calibrated to always accept the longest chain because it has the most cumulative amount of work, so it's the most reliable thing. That's how that works. So the point is, you've moved coins from point A to point B. It's got included in a block. Now, if you want to respend those coins, move from point A to point C, you need to find a replacement block for the one that included the block that moved your coins out of your control. You have to outmine the network to do it. The network is incredibly powerful. You're not going to be able to do it, and that's where the blockchain itself becomes the thing that both generals can look at and say, when are we invading? Noon? They both have it. Whatever the last block says, that's when you're invading. So General A says, I want to invade at noon, signs digitally a thing that goes into something that requires this amount of work to maintain. General Y can look at it and say, according to this data, that has been has been formed by a process of incredibly difficult to participate in work, that we are invading at this time, and as a result of that, he can rely on that. He knows the information and it's genuine, and he knows that if General X is for any reason thinking something else, it doesn't matter, because they both have an authority of sorts that they can check with, but the authority is something that's being participated in voluntarily, and none of the information in it can be changed by any government or any other entity or any individual. So in Bitcoin, all transactions are final once they get inside the blockchain, except for very theoretical edge cases where a blockchain can be reorged, it's called, or reorganized. And that requires going into extreme theoretical territory. And in practice, it's not something that's ever something you should worry about. If you receive Bitcoin for anything, it's usually reliable before it gets into a block. But it's not truly reliable until it's in the blockchain. And once it's in the blockchain, there is no modifying that record of history or that ledger that has just been appended, because you have to redo the amount of work. And I cannot for a minute overemphasize the miracle of that discovery, because it really does solve one of the hardest problems in computer science, this two generals problem. There is no... One thing to mention is that it doesn't automatically... The technology itself is nothing without the scale that has been achieved by Bitcoin. And that's one thing that is constantly... that people not understanding that has afforded some of the worst scam artists I've ever come across billions of dollars from naive investors that don't understand that a blockchain that can be appended to by someone with one laptop running some mining software using their graphics card. If you make a payment on that network to me, I am not going to trust it the way I trust Bitcoin, a payment that goes on the Bitcoin network, because a payment that happens on the Bitcoin network, I know what it takes. I know how much work is required to rewrite the history of that transaction. It requires outmining the entire Bitcoin network consistently, because when you remine a block and you, for some reason, you manage to outmine the entire Bitcoin network before it carried on. You've published a Bitcoin transaction, it's got inside a block, now they've given you your good or service, and you want to move those same coins back under your control, or to someone else, make two payments with the same coins. After your transaction's in a block, you got 10 minutes to find an alternative to that block. And it's something that requires just an inordinate amount of computing power. And given that all the mining happens with ASICs, meaning computers that are specifically designed for one purpose, which is mining Bitcoin, and are therefore way more efficient at it than general purpose computers, what that means is that you can have all the supercomputers in the world under your control. You still won't be able to outmine the Bitcoin network, because supercomputers aren't specifically designed to mine Bitcoin. So you want to outmine the Bitcoin network, it's basically impossible because of how many people are mining on it. And anyone that starts to approach a large amount of hash power on the Bitcoin mining as a Bitcoin miner, the more they get, the more their income is dependent on the stability of Bitcoin. And the likelihood of them ever doing anything funny with any of those blocks goes down as their investment gets larger and their commitment gets larger. That's part of the game theory of what was designed in Bitcoin, in that anyone who might have any incentive to screw with Bitcoin will always end up making the network stronger and make it harder for anyone that wants to attack it. So back to the example of if you were to start your own currency with all the same technology as Bitcoin and just call it something else, the problem is only a few of you are mining it. And if anyone can outmine you, they can start scamming people. And once they can start scamming people, what these scam coins always do is they implement a centralized authority. That's what Ripple is, that's what Ethereum is, that's what Litecoin is, that's what Bitcoin Cash is, that's what all these other cryptos are. They take the problem that Bitcoin solved, they don't achieve the scale required for it to actually be meaningfully solved, and then they go, shit, well, we can't have people scamming other people, so I'm in charge, and that transaction, you did move coins from A to B, not from A to C. Congrats, you're PayPal again. You've just invented a centralized coin. you are Canadian Tire money, you are whatever. Like, it doesn't, you've not done anything. You've completely gone back to where we were in the first place, but you are lent the credibility of Bitcoin by the sheer awesomeness of Bitcoin means that people now assume that you have the same immutability and the same decentralization because you're using a blockchain, but you probably aren't. In fact, you definitely aren't, because Bitcoin has a gravitational effect and a self-fulfilling, a self-propelling and accelerating momentum that attracts more miners and more security, because you always want to mine on the most secure chain because you don't want to waste your work by mining on a lesser chain and potentially having that work be wasted. You don't want to mine a block and have the network decide that you didn't mine that block actually. And that's what happens all the time in all the other centralized altcoins. So, I mean, I don't want to spend too long talking about what the altcoins are. It's always a necessary discussion, though, because anytime people learn about Bitcoin, they inevitably learn about Ethereum and alternative versions of Bitcoin, like Bcash or Bitcoin SV or Bitcoin Gold or any of these garbage projects that are just complete scams that play on the fact that people don't understand proof of work. And it's as simple as that. Bitcoin is something called proof of work, which means if you want to change any of the history within Bitcoin, and by the way, the further back you go into Bitcoin's history, the more work you have to show. You got to show that work, and you can't fake it. There is no analogy for it, except it's like if I make a computer program that says, "Hey, it asks me to input a number." And I put the number 70 in, and then it goes to someone else and says, "Hey, find a number between 0 and 100. I know what it is, but you've got to find the right number." And you sit there, you type in 1, nope, 2, nope, 3, nope. You try all different numbers. You know it's between 1 and 100. Turns out it was 70. Now, is there any alternative in that process to trying numbers until you find the right number? No, there isn't. On how many goes is it going to take you to find the right number? If I say you got to find a number between 1 and 100, how many goes is it going to take? 50 on average. You might get it the first guess. You might guess all the numbers. You might guess all of the wrong numbers first and get the last one. That's why sometimes Bitcoin blocks can be an hour between, or someone can find 1 second after the last block. There is variance, there is randomness, but on average, if I keep saying find a number between 1 and 100, it's going to take you 50 goes to do it. And that's why Bitcoin blocks on average are roughly once every 10 minutes. And every 2 weeks, the network will adjust the So supposing you want to introduce an element of time to this, you say, okay, I'm going to ask, it's a number between 1 and 100. You 15 guys go and try numbers. And for some reason now, you're not finding the 50 tries get tried a lot faster now because there's more people trying them. The solutions are coming faster. Those are the equivalent of blocks in this analogy. But you don't want Bitcoins to be created faster. This is not the Federal Reserve. We're not deciding, hey, there's COVID. We need to give loads of people loads of money. Let's print lots of dollars now. Political decision making. No, that's not how Bitcoin works in any capacity. How Bitcoin works is, this is how many are going to be created by miners. If we start getting too many miners and they start creating blocks too fast, which equates to more new Bitcoins being created too quickly than we wanted, then guess what? The number isn't between 1 and 100. It's between 1 and 500 or 1 and 503 or however many you need to adjust for how many people are working on solutions to that problem. But here's the next part. If you've got if you have 500 people finding solutions to that problem, and someone wants I don't know how to marry this into the analogy exactly, but if you want to create problems and here's what you're doing. If you have 500 people solving these random problems, but while solving the problems, they were adding in a bunch of stuff, which are Bitcoin transactions, into the solution they give back to you, then Supposing any one of them wants to change one of those weird bits of data, which are the transactions they're attaching to their solution suddenly is wrong and they have to redo all of the guesses. It's like, here's a bunch of Bitcoin transactions. Now find a number between 1 and 100. Supposing it was 70. Yeah, it was 70. But if you want to change one of the transactions, the number's not 70 anymore. It's 23. And there's no link at all. You destroy the work and have to start completely from the beginning again if you change any one piece of data in a Bitcoin block, which is just the way the cryptography works, which is an incredible thing. And it didn't have to be that way, but it is that way. That's how maths works. And it's an incredible thing. So, but again, to finish the analogy, supposing you have 500 people, excuse me, a sip of coffee. So supposing you have 500 people working on solutions, and that means they find the solution once every 10 minutes. Then another 500 people start working on it. Now you're getting solutions every 5 minutes. That's no good. Network adjust, it says, we're finding blocks too fast. An automatic process. Now we're making it so that solutions are between 1 and 200, not 1 and 100. Network goes, oh, it's harder. Twice as much work for us. Yeah, but you got to do the work. And the point is, if you now want to screw with it, if you want to be one of those malicious actors in the space, one of those 500, one of those 1,000 people, or I forget what number I just used, and you want to change one of the bits of data that go along with the solution, you have to outpace the other 999 people. And they are working 999 times faster than you can. So you can't outpace them. And given that the network is always looking at the latest solution, which is part of the data, by the way, that forms the question for the next, which forms part of the next question. That's why it's a blockchain, by the way. If you want to change any of the data from 3 blocks ago, you have to redo the work not only for that block, but the block 2 blocks ago and the latest block. Every bit of data affects everything that happens in the chain, and it makes you have to restart from the beginning every time. So proof of work is not constructive. When you're working on a solution, you're working on a specific set of data, and you're trying random numbers until you find one that satisfies and answers the problem. Here's all my data. I've got to find a number between 0 and 100 after I hash all that data. Blah, blah, blah. You try that, and you get 79. That was the solution. Congrats. Now, that solution, combine that with a bunch more transactions, hash all this stuff together, start trying random numbers until you cough out the next number, which is 83. So you try, you get 83. Yeah, I found the block. Oh, but I want to change one of the bits of data that was in there. Oh, now I'm not getting 83 anymore. I need to start trying different random numbers. This is what, like when you read articles on Bitcoin mining, it will say they're solving complex mathematical problems, but they're not. They're actually doing the most mind-numbingly boring thing ever. They are trying random numbers until that number, the numbers they are trying, when combined with Bitcoin transactions and the header from the previous block, hash to a value that the network will accept for the latest block. As simple as that. You're trying random numbers, doing a bit of cryptography on those numbers, and when you get lucky and you win the lottery, you find a valid block, and you'll be, every 10 minutes someone's guaranteed to do that in the Bitcoin network. And if that starts going up in time, if it starts taking too long, the network adjusts and makes it easier. But in reality, that's pretty rare, because there are always more miners rather than fewer. Yeah, I don't know. That's an interesting, I didn't know I was going to go into that as much as I did, but it's good to talk about how the blockchain actually works. The proof of work thing is amazing, because that's the new concept to get your head around, because that's not how record keeping in finance works in your day-to-day life. In your day-to-day life, it's not proof of work, it's always proof of authority. Sorry, I got interrupted there. Yeah, it's not proof of work in your day-to-day life, it's proof of authority and somehow trust of the maintenance of a reputation. I mean, to be honest, reputation requires work to acquire as well. So it's kind of in that way it can be seen as a similar concept. Like You can think that the money you have in your bank right now, HSBC aren't going to steal it because they've spent a lot of time and money and advertising and becoming HSBC and forming that brand. And, that's why if you buy a knockoff product from China that's, it's supposed to be an Android, but it's not really, or it's a fake iPhone charger, they haven't spent the same amount of work developing the same reputation, so you can't rely on the product in the same way. That is, in essence, the only thing you really can trust, because you can't fake work. You can't, it's the thing that means someone's put in effort to achieve a result. The result they want combines and is the same as the result I want. They want to be known for making good products. I want to buy a product that is good. So we're going to work together in that regard. The example of someone releasing an iPhone that the logo is slightly different because it's a cheap knockoff, there's no work that's been done there. The only work that's been done is a very trivial amount, which was to make a logo and to get a product in a store that, is on an unreliable Amazon reseller or something like that. That's the situation you're in there, where you don't have the same amount of work that's gone into something, so you can't trust it to the same extent. In banking, that comes from the fact that they've gone to the work not only to build their brand and reputation, but they've met the licensing requirements to be able to operate as a bank without being shut down. That makes them trustworthy, but it also means you can reliably know that they will not respect your property if an authority figure goes to them and threatens them. They will exist, and they exist in a regulatory framework that they have to accept in order to achieve the scale they've accepted. And if you don't like the ethics that go along with the requirements of financial institutions, which I don't, and which most people on the planet don't, then don't be a part of them. Your exit is Bitcoin. That's the only system where you don't have that same regulatory capture. You are completely free to do what you want with your Bitcoin. And Bitcoin network, importantly, can stand up to attack from the incumbent financial system like none of the currencies before proof of work was discovered, or at least refined into this concept. None of those currencies were able to get rid of the central authority, and as a result of having a central authority, they would always be shut down. Bitcoin was the first one that is something you cannot shut down, which means it can defy authority forever. And all of the coins that have come since Bitcoin have the central points of failure again, because using a blockchain does not magically make you immune to coercion. It just means there is a work requirement to coercion, and that requirement needs to be quite high. And Bitcoin, due to its alien nature and the fact that government institutions can be quite slow, flew under the radar for years with a fairly low amount of cumulative work. And it could have been attacked, but it managed to achieve a scale, and enough people were attracted to it, and the coins themselves that the miners are given as a reward or as a payment for maintaining the security of the network, achieved enough value, and that value attracted enough additional miners that it's a self-perpetuating cycle, as I mentioned, that the network achieved a certain scale to the point where anyone that wants to go and mine will mine using Bitcoin, and anyone that wants to attack a currency will go to any of the others with a lower proof of work requirement, because then they might actually be successful. And in Bitcoin, if your attack isn't successful, you get nothing. You don't get a little bit. If you want to waste a lot of electricity and invest a lot of money into a lot of Bitcoin mining, you're never going to outmine the entire network. But supposing you get lucky and somehow manage to find 3 blocks faster than the rest of the network, and you do some double spending in there and you steal some Bitcoin off some people, congratulations, you've made a huge investment into Bitcoin. You are now one of the few people in the world that's capable of generating quite a lot of Bitcoin. Those Bitcoin are now worth much less because the network is now seen as less secure. So the value of its native token has now crashed. So your investment is now completely tanked. It's useless. But you managed to scam a few people, except the network has kind of figured out collectively that this is bullshit, and they've rooted around it and they've figured out another way, or the network has collectively just decided to start ignoring your blocks for whatever reason. It's soft forked. It's done whatever it needed to do. It's quite a hard thing to orchestrate, but if something obviously demonstrably wrong happens in Bitcoin, it can change. It's not... Bitcoin is by design very, very difficult to change, and the bigger it gets, the harder it is to change, which is another one of its areas of security. But as a miner, if you want to be a malicious miner, you can create... The amount of damage you can create is quite limited, but the amount of damage you can do to yourself is pretty much unlimited. And your best bet, if you're not a complete idiot, and if you're somehow a complete idiot and you've managed to buy a few $1 billion worth of mining equipment, you can maybe cause a few headaches for a couple of days. If you are, however, not an idiot and you've got a few $1 billion worth of mining equipment, you're going to start mining. You're going to help find some blocks, and you're going to get paid in Bitcoin for it, and you're going to want those Bitcoin to be worth as much in dollar terms as possible. And everyone sharing those same values of self-interest is what makes Bitcoin something you can rely on. There is no moral ethos to it, not at least in the sense of, oh, we're a bank and we want as many customers as possible, but we don't want people that sell porn, for example. Porn is really unethical, so we are Visa and we won't allow a porn site to use our credit cards. There's a moral judgment there. There's discrimination against... I'm not defending or attacking any particular profession. That's not the point. It's just that Bitcoin doesn't discriminate. And once you get out of a system of discrimination and moral judgment, that's where freedom is. Of course it is. So, fantastic. That's what Bitcoin is. That's what Bitcoin allows. And I didn't even really touch at all on any of the economic elements here. The economic elements are great. Deflation is the way forward. Of course, because you want to have a savings account again. And an entire generation has had that kicked out of them. They've been told to spend your money as quickly as possible because it's only going to be worth less soon. So buy anything. Buy retarded shit. Go and buy a house. Buy products you don't need. Buy stocks and shares that are hugely inflated. Buy commodities. Buy crude oil at $150 a barrel. Invest in anything. Invest in futures. Invest in education, which is a complete joke at the moment. All of these things are only possible because money is robbed of its value through sneaky inflation all the time. Bitcoin walks away from that and says, if you own some Bitcoin now, don't spend it unless you really have to, because it's going to be worth more in the future. Simple as that. That means, okay, I'll make a savings account. That was not a taboo thing to do once upon a time, but every mainstream economist and politician has been rolling their eyes at Bitcoin since it existed, because they genuinely believe their own Kool-Aid when they say, that's not how economics works. You need your money to slowly but surely lose value all the time, otherwise people won't spend and you won't have an economy. That is bullshit. That's not how it needs to work at all. You can have gold-based economies, which were the norm for a long time until governments decided that just wasn't what they were going to do, and they were going to go full fiat, which is, I believe, 1971, when they finally said that's it. Money is just a completely arbitrary medium. It doesn't represent anything anywhere, and we are going to. It will be done by government mandate, or by fiat means let it be done, and it's an instruction, and it's I don't know. I'm kind of losing my train of thought with that, if I'm honest. But the point is, when in a system like Bitcoin, it's a different economic model for a start. It's not a Keynesian economic model where you're told you're forced to spend your money and you are punished for saving. That's not a good system to be under, and it requires it puts us all very much on a treadmill, and no, that's no fun. There's that. There's the fact that everything is final. Like as a merchant, if you accept Bitcoin, once the Bitcoin transaction where someone has paid you is in a block, you're done. You have your money. That's not how it works with PayPal. That's not how it works with credit cards. with these middlemen, they sit on your money for a long time, and they will reverse those transactions if there's any hint of any sort of altercation or any disagreement or anything like that. And again, these systems are expensive to maintain. They are apparently there for our own good. But I mean, that's what I said at the very beginning of the video. Because you have complete responsibility for your own coins, you have complete freedom. If you can handle that responsibility, you can operate in a system where if anyone sends you money, you have that money, and no one in the world can deny you that, and no one can reverse that. So you're good. I mean, no one can stop a situation where someone holds a gun to your head and says, "Give me your Bitcoin." There's no fixing that. But any other system is completely thwarted by this, because there's no middleman and there's no centralization. So there's no one to coerce. There's no one to go after if an authority figure is unhappy with the history of. I mean, they've tried. There's so much Bitcoin has been used for loads of illegal purposes, and whether or not you're defending or attacking that can be a qualm for some people. I mean, it's a stupid one. If criminals can't use your technology doesn't work properly. That's not a flaw. Like, criminals wear shoes and breathe oxygen, and it's a really stupid argument to come up against, but it happens a surprising amount. But anyway, Bitcoin allows that. But anyway, I'm not trying to advocate. I'm not trying to advocate for Bitcoin here as much as I am trying to explain what it actually is and how it works. And it really is unlike anything else. It's really something. It's a source of information that people can rely on. It's an account of what's happened in history that is actually genuinely impossible to modify in any practical sense. That's incredible. That's never happened before. Like, anyone can know anything because of the internet. The internet sort of opens the world up to us, and you can know anything, but that doesn't mean information is going to remain there forever. And it doesn't mean that anything you're reading is an account of what's actually happened or true. It's still amazing, and it still opens the world up to us, but Bitcoin is something else on a different level entirely. When if a bit of information gets into Bitcoin's blockchain, more than transactions can end up in that chain, by the way. You can write arbitrary text with your Bitcoin transaction too. It allows for that. So people have uploaded their wedding vows and, things like that. It's like as symbolic as carving your lover's initial into a tree, or putting a padlock on a metal bridge. There's a feeling of permanence there. But no, Bitcoin has taken this to the level of, if there's information in Bitcoin's chain, it will exist basically unaltered forever. And the requirement that's required to undoing or modifying that data or deleting it is impossible on a practical level. Only theoretically can it ever be modified. And that's beautiful. And that's an amazing, wonderful thing to exist. And if you want to write something in Bitcoin's blockchain, you can do it without anyone telling you whether or not you're allowed to, and without anyone ever undoing it because they don't like it. So that's by solving one of these unsolvable problems in computer science, it presents us with a resource for our species that gives us unmodifiable accounts of history. And not just financial history, but you can upload the words 2 + 2 = 5 into Bitcoin's blockchain. It doesn't make it true, but the fact that it was uploaded can never be changed, and the time that it got included in the block can never be changed. Just to be clear, not all information in Bitcoin's blockchain is true, but the point is the fact that it's there is true. So that's, I would not be surprised if you're a brand new person to Bitcoin, if you have more questions than answers from this video. It's a really hard topic to discuss and to explain. There are maybe some more simple, straightforward questions I should have addressed that I can think of, such as, I'm a single mom. I have $1,000 in the bank. If I put it into Bitcoin, will it be worth a lot more in a year from now? Stuff like that. That's what a lot of people have on their mind because they hear about so many people getting rich from Bitcoin. The answer is, I don't know. Predicting markets is Bitcoin's market and Bitcoin's price is one of those unknowable things like weather. It's really hard to predict, and there are a lot of people that try to predict it, and there are some patterns to the price for sure, but it's also just not a super interesting thing, and giving investment advice is also quite a risky thing for me to do. I agree with Tone Vase, who says the best time to buy Bitcoin was yesterday, and that's always true, and I agree with him. Don't buy a silly amount. Don't put yourself in a situation where you have to panic and sell at a loss. Bitcoin's very volatile, but the longer you get into it, what will happen is you can buy a lot of Bitcoin. It can go up in value a lot. It can obviously get overexcited, and you can get an impression that everyone buying it has no clue what they're buying. Then the market can pop and completely tank for a couple of years, and you find you just don't want to sell because you don't want to go back to the old system of, okay, I'll just sell even though I'm even in profit. I don't want to sell because I like what I have here. I like that I went to the effort of securing my Bitcoin. I own them. It's an inheritance that can't be taken from my children. It's there. I own it, and it's a secure thing, and no one can ever tell me I don't own those things. And because it's deflationary, because it's a store of value, you are very rewarded for having that attitude. And if you're a conscientious person, the longer you maintain and hold on to those coins, the more you're going to want to learn about it and how the network works. And you realize that it's a superpower, understanding cryptography and economics and computer science and all of these things, because they come into play in lots of different areas of your life, not just Bitcoin. But Bitcoin, the more you look at it, the more, there's the phrase, to the man who has a hammer, everything looks like a nail. To us Bitcoiners, every problem in the world seems like Bitcoin is the solution to it. But that's not as ridiculous a claim as it sounds, because the significance of the printing press being invented and the significance of the internet coming around are really quite extreme moments of change for our species, and Bitcoin is larger than either of those two. It's only really akin to the separation of church and state, and that is a huge change in our species for sure. The taking away the ability of politicians to print money at a whim, to decide where that printed money goes, and to dictate an inflation rate, or an interest rate rather, to a culture, is an extreme power for them to be given, and it's not something that's ever used responsibly or in a way you're going to agree with or have any control over. Bitcoin is an exit from that, and that in and of itself is a motivation to become a part of it. But if you're anyone that is not in a financially included part of the world where you can't easily open brokerage accounts and have savings accounts in different currencies and things like that, like Westerners and Europeans can. If you're from any other country, Central America, South America, Africa, Asia, India, Russia, all the stans, if you're from any of those places, you don't need me to tell you how good Bitcoin is. You already know, because your local currency has proved itself over and over again to be not reliable in any capacity. And the truth is, the United States dollar is not accessible to everyone. If you're a Chilean or a Venezuelan or a Colombian, the United States dollar is undeniably better than your local currency, but it's not available to you. And your bank, if you can even have a bank account, is not going to allow you to store dollars in there. So you're stuck with keeping actual physical dollars under your mattress, but they're not Bitcoin. You can't back them up. You can't. If there's a fire, your Bitcoin can be backed up. It's just information at the end of the day. Cash isn't. Cash is physical. The only real thing that can make people understand Bitcoin is to have a good understanding of gold, and then to understand what gold would look like if verification was easy, and if storage was easy, and if doing transactions of any size was easy, and if the universe genuinely had a finite supply of it rather than an approximately limited supply. Like, you don't really know how much gold there is. There's not that much left in the earth. Most of the low-hanging fruit's been picked, but we don't know how much gold there is. We know exactly how many Bitcoin there are. We know how many Bitcoin there will ever be. And the requirements to changing those things, I didn't even get into nodes. I didn't get into them at all. What miners do is half of the security of the network, but they are not responsible for the complete security of the network. What comes with the rest of it is there are the people that verify what the miners do, and they are ultimately the final guardians of Bitcoin security, and they are people who run full nodes, and they are people who want to do that. And you're incentivized to want to do that because running a full node is the only way to know whether you really have a Bitcoin or not. And running a full node is very easy to do. It's a very trivial thing. And it's something you must do to be Bitcoining properly. And that's not just snobbery. That's a practical concern. If you're not running a node, you don't really know. You're checking with a third party whether the Bitcoin you just got sent was actually sent to you and was the person sending it actually had them in the first place. A node is how you check that, because it downloads all of Bitcoin's history and it verifies all the work done by all the miners. And the Bitcoin you received, it will track it back through the blockchain and know its origins. And there's only one way to do that: verifying the work that was done by other people and making sure it was legitimate. And you know that work can't be faked. So you know that whatever you've got right there was difficult to do, and no one's going to be able to outclass that or rewrite history and give you a different version of it with the same amount of work, because all the work was being done on Bitcoin's proper chain and the evidence of it is there for you to look at and verify. Nodes are actually the final, most important thing to get into. And anyone can run one, and the resource requirement to doing so is kept as low as possible deliberately, because that's where Bitcoin's decentralization truly comes from, and it's what none of the shitcoins care about. Because, I mean, you're looking at, if you only have a few nodes, those become the ultimate arbiters and the gatekeepers of the currency, and that's no good. PayPal, if you have Bitcoin but only one node, Bitcoin is PayPal, or it is Visa, or it is a bank. Because whoever runs the node controls what happens. Miners can do a lot of work and find a perfectly valid block, but if that node says I'm not accepting that block, then that block doesn't get accepted. In Bitcoin you have so many different nodes, so many hundreds of thousands, that when miners mine, they have to jump through all the hoops set for them by those nodes, and if they don't do it correctly, they waste their work, or their attempt to scam will fail. Bitcoin security comes from its nodes, and I've gone into that a lot of times in my other videos about the fork wars. And the reason we won the fork wars is because we are the node operators, and we are collectively. I don't want to use the word collective too much, because Bitcoin is very much the antidote to collectivist ideologies. But nonetheless, collectively, the nodes are the ones who verify the work that the miners do and we're the ones that keep the miners honest. And the miners are the ones that provide us an account of history that they collectively make more difficult to modify by their contribution. So Bitcoin kind of has two legs. It's got the nodes and the miners, and they work in tandem to make it very difficult for any modification to happen. And the modification becomes impossible, and the extension of the chain or the appending of the blockchain becomes not impossible, but becomes something with such a high work requirement to it that you're best off collaborating with the rest of the miners within pools and putting all your work together, dividing up different numbers checkings till you eventually combine and find a block, hopefully in a group of miners that all work together trying different numbers, and then you divide the reward up between you. Those are called mining pools. Most mining is done in pools. No one solo mines, because every 10 minutes you have to start again trying to find a random number in a set so big that it's like try and win the lottery, but you can pick as many tickets as you want for well, not for free, but here, try, 7 numbers, and then this ticket, 7 numbers, this ticket, 7 numbers, and you can try as many as you want, but in 10 minutes, you're going to have to start again. And hopefully you'll be able to find one. You'll be able to find the winning lottery ticket in 10 minutes. If I give you as many goes as you like, how many lottery tickets can you get? Because what's your chance of winning the lottery? 1 in 100 million or something? Can you try 100 million different lottery tickets in that time? What if you can only try 1,000? You're never going to find the winning lottery ticket, and you've only got 10 minutes, right? So what you do is you divide up. You go, okay, we got between you and me and this group of miners, we can try 800,000 lottery tickets. Let's do it. Divide it all up. One of you finds the right one, and you say, great, and we'll divide that between all of us in proportion to how many tickets each person tried. If I tried 400,000 of those 800,000, and you two did 200,000 each, I get half the reward, you get a quarter, and you get a quarter. That's how mining is divided up in pools. I'm glad I managed to get into that. What else is there to discuss? I don't know exactly what else there is to discuss. It's a long and deep and complicated process, but and there are so many. It's videos like this, guys. I'm telling you, it's like if an alien came up to you, and otherwise, if very highly advanced species of alien came up to you and said, "What's the internet?" Like, I mean, yeah, obviously they'd have something of their own that looked like the internet, so you could just say, "Oh, it's that thing that you already have. It's just a different name." But trying to explain the internet. Well, all right, let's say you're trying to explain the internet to someone from 100 years ago. How do you explain it? It's just, it's a decentralized network that people can do whatever they like on. That's it. And Bitcoin is that too, but it's just something that I find too, I'm inspired to talk about it, but at the same time, I really want to do it justice. This has been my passion for 10 years now, and every time I talk about it, I learn something new about it, and it's my pleasure to teach people about it and to onboard people into it. And there are just, there's just nothing quite like it, and nothing as compelling that I've found in day-to-day life in the modern world. There's nothing that frees us quite from the dilapidated institutions that plague us, that, like I mentioned earlier, so many of the institutions around us are just completely fraudulent now. Like COVID has been the complete corruption of the scientific and medical establishments, to the point, and journalistic and media establishments too, to the point where pretty much anyone paying any attention is now just in extreme conspiracy theory territory, where they have to assume that everything comes along with an agenda and has been corrupted by politics, even when it's supposed to be trust the science. Science is a method, and if it's not adhered to, but nonetheless you're given a fraudulent, unscientifically derived conclusion by a guy in a white coat called a doctor. In that circumstance, when that's being done over and over and over again, and you're seeing ineffective lockdowns, and you're seeing studies that say masks don't really do anything, and you're seeing studies that say all of the testing is very unreliable and the false positives are out of control, and you're seeing but none of this is allowed to filter through into the public, and you're seeing a dogma dominate, which is used to justify insane control over a population in all of the planet practically. And it's infuriating because it seems so ineffective to anyone paying attention. But you're not allowed to know this stuff, and you're not allowed to make your own judgments, and that's due to the corruption of these institutions. But then you have the educational institutions as well. When it comes to bring it back to Bitcoin, when they're talking about economics and finance, and it's a complete circle jerk of a system where people who ruined the economy leading up to 2008, who bailed out the people that ruined the economy, it's a revolving door system between them and those that lecture at all the top schools like Harvard, and like all of the people lecturing on economics are the people responsible for the economic shitstorm we found ourselves in. And they do not allow any dissent or any out-of-the-box thinking, and they all subscribe to these stupid schools of economics that haven't been around for very long, that obviously don't work, and that can only hobble along due to how advanced technology has become and the things it's allowed us to be able to do. I mean, the educational institutions are completely out of whack. The financial institutions are plundering the ship, and in front of everyone's face, they keep doing it, and they keep getting away with murder, and there's not a lot you can really do about it. But I mean, if it infuriates you, and you're sick of signing online petitions and joining Facebook groups and having your opinions be generally unacceptable, and you know, having to probe a bit when you talk and socialize and make sure that you're not going to offend people, and you know, and you're not required to adhere to certain political rhetoric or political correctness that you obviously know not to be true, then if you're just finding yourself in a situation where it seems to be a bit hopeless and there's not a lot of you can't seem to find any outlet or any productive way to fight back against this. I've never found anything in my entire life of this frustration that works like Bitcoin works. It provides a complete escape and a complete a system that's free of the judgment of those who pertain to be doing who claim to be limiting what I'm able to do for my own good, who are in reality completely corrupt. And that's like, I mean, we already have like systems where COVID vaccinations are being like the way they're being doled out is being done in accordance with identity politics, and you know, the notion that I've seen it written in the New York Times that yes, old people are more vulnerable to COVID, but we're not going to prioritize them for the vaccines because they're predominantly white. And, you know, stupid things like that. I'm not trying to get on white people are so much the victim here or something like that. Whether you believe that or not is not the point of this video. It's just, if you want to come to a system where there's no judgment, there's never going to be, oh, yes, you bought some Bitcoin, but, you know, your great-great-great-grandfather owned a slave, so now you don't have that Bitcoin anymore. There's none of this bullshit. There's no judgment. It's just complete freedom. And it's what, if there was any coherence to the claims of these control freaks in our cultures who wanted equality, Bitcoin is the ultimate equality. No one actually wants that, but they pretend they do. But Bitcoin doesn't care who you are. It doesn't care what color you are, what gender you are, or what age you are, or whether what you do is illegal, whether it's illegal in that country or this country. Doesn't matter. Bitcoin doesn't care. It can't care. It makes no moral judgments, and that is a result of that allows freedom, and freedom is its own reward. And there are those that will tell you that Bitcoin's used by terrorists, and Bitcoin's used by Bitcoin's used by people that make pornography and like really bad pornography and all this. Yeah, I mean, people use Bitcoin for evil purposes, sure, but so what? You know, that doesn't mean you destroy Bitcoin and walk away from the benefit of such a technology. You can deny yourself that if you want, but I don't suggest doing it. Anyway, I've rambled on enough. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope it was helpful to you. If you have any questions on anything regarding Bitcoin, I love helping people understand better, and you can contact me on this channel, or you can email me bitcoinmechanic.ca@protonmail.com, and you can ask me anything, and I really like to help people and share what I know, and help myself understand the technology better in the process too. So, and yeah, any comments on the channel or any subscriptions or likes, any interaction is really welcome, as it helps me grow this channel and helps keep motivating me to share with people what I know and what I've learned about Bitcoin. So I'm surprised at how fast the channel has grown already, and it's really been encouraging. So I'd really like I'd really appreciate any interaction at all. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great day.